Another album which I was shamelessly drawn toward via its cover art. This is an old Counter-Reformation piece. It's from the Middle Ages, you understand. They're depicting Martin Luther as the bagpipe of Satan. Very interesting stuff. Or not, I've been doing some quick research, and apparently it's not meant to be Martin Luther specifically. I first became familiar with... If you go to the Wikipedia article for anti-Protestantism, I first became familiar with this image. It's listed as Luther as the Devil's Bagpipes by Edward Schoen, circa 1535, although according to the BritishMuseum.org, this is one of the most striking images to be seen among the vast number of broadsheets directed by the reformers against the Roman Catholic Church. The image of the devil perched on the shoulders of a monk, through whose ears and nose he plays his tune, is made particularly pungent by the more usual association of bagpipes with lust. The idea that monks were the instruments of the devil was common and resulted in numerous woodcuts showing them as thinly disguised monsters. Apparently it has been noted that this could be construed as a caricature of Luther, as he was himself a monk. However, no such print is known with the addition of a suitable anti-Lutheran text. As from the album art, I was hoping this would be closer to one of my, wannabe Sabbath knockoffs, my prospective wannabe Sabbath knockoffs from the day, which may or may not even exist. Although, what we had was closer to something, I don't know, rootsier and kind of, maybe slightly jazzy, but more so kind of psych jam music. Maybe gothic at points. There is one long track. The second track is an 11-minute tune inspired by the source material of the group's name. Titus Groan is, of course, a novel from Mervyn Peake. I've still not read these novels. I said I was going to. It's not happened as of yet, frankly. Anyway, the biography is taken from Prog Archives. They're a UK band, by the way. Considered crossover prog, taking their name from Mervyn Peake's gothic fantasy novel. Titus Groan was a quartet led by guitar, keyboardist and singer Stuart Cowell and wind player Tony Priestland. Their sound approaches the early UK prog, sometimes called proto-prog, all tracks being over 5 minutes long and often fronted by wind instruments, is promising, but ultimately deceiving as the songs lack depth. Centered around the great 12 minutes Hall of Bright Carvings track, also a Peake theme, the album was released in early 1970 on the collectible Dawn label. Titus Groan also released a 3-track single the same year, all 3 tracks appearing as bonus on the C for Miles label CD reissue, being named Titus Groan Plus. It was written by Hughes Chantrain from Belgium. I guess he's not as big a fan of it. Apparently the group disbanded in 1971. I'd like to read out one of the most positive review on this site from one Psychedelic Paul. Titus Groan were a short-lived British jazz rock quartet named after the first Gormenghast novel by Mervyn Peake. Their one and only self-titled album, released in 1970, contained 5 tracks all over 5 minutes long, including one extended suite, Hall of Bright Carvings, of a running time of nearly 12 minutes. The 1989 CD reissue added 3 bonus tracks to the album. Let's venture forth now into the fantastic fantasy world of Titus Groan. Actually, before that, I'll give my own thoughts on the album briefly. I think this is a really moody, cool, atmospheric experience. If you want something akin to a soundtrack to a British folk horror film from the day, a Hammer sort of affair, you can imagine Titus Groan being appropriately satiating. There isn't electric distortion in the kind of 70s stoner sense, but what you have is something more traditional. It's like Black Sabbath without the distortion in some respects. Anyway, onto Psychedelic Paul's review. To continue this, the album opens in rousing and rollicking fashion with It Wasn't For You, a lively saxophonic blast of good old-fashioned bluesy jazz rock, very much in the style of those other fine purveyors of uplifting funky fusion, Ginger Baker's Air Force and the Graham Bond Organization. The singer has the same kind of rough, raucous voice as Graham Bond. In other words, they both sound like they eat gravel for breakfast in the morning, but that's no less than what we'd expect from the best of British blues singers. In fact, this is just the kind of energetic and spirited jazz rock we could all do with listening to first thing in the morning to get us up out of bed and instill a spirit of vim and vigour, and get up and go energy to face the day ahead. Alternatively, you could listen to some gentle and relaxing new age music and roll over and go back to sleep again. Now that Titus Groan have grabbed our attention with the lively opening number, it's time for the extended 4-piece suite, Hall of Bright Carvings. This epic song is a real musical tour de force featuring flamboyant flutes, heavy guitar riffing, booming bass lines, and pounding percussion. The dynamic contrast between the gently melodic pastoral passages combined with sudden explosive outbursts of musical artillery, fire, are what really sets this music alight with power and passion. Titus Groan can really carve their names of pride for producing stunning jazz rock like this. Side 2 opens with I Can't Change, which ironically is a song full of constant change. It's a resonant flute-driven refrain that draws obvious comparisons with Jethro Tull, of course, although the song takes a very unexpected turn midway through with a pleasant country rock diversion before a return to more familiar fluty jazz rock pastures. Either way, it's a great song that barrels along relentlessly and features enough sudden tempo changes to delight devotees of jazzy prog rock. The next song, It's All Up With Us, is very commercially appealing, which would have made it an ideal choice for a release as a single. The impassioned silver-toned singer is positively bursting of optimism here, and the heartwarming music sounds as bright and uplifting as a radiant sunburst of rainbow colours after a summer shower. This is timeless evergreen music, where all the brightly coloured flowers in the garden are blooming, and talking of flowers also comes Fuschia, a misspelling perhaps, which is sadly the final song on the album before All Good Things Must Come to an End. Unless, of course, you're lucky enough to possess the CD reissue with 3 bonus tracks included. Fuschia refers to Miss Fuschia Groan from the Titus Groan novel. Okay. The music is another flawless, funky fusion of pounding jazz rock energy, which is altogether upbeat, up-tempo, and uplifting. Titus Groan have delivered a memorable, timeless jazz rock classic with their one and only album release. This energetic, evergreen album sounds just as good today, 50 years on, as it ever did back in the halcyon days of the proggy 1970s. And now rate your music review from one Karasaspa, from June 20th, 2012, taking their name from a Mervyn Peake novel. Titus Groan were a jazz-tinged, medieval dabbling and really quite eclectic progressive rock outfit. Signed to the Dawn label, they released this single 1970 album before disappearing as soon as they appeared. A shame too, although of a varying quality overall. Their eponymous album contains some high-class work which could and should have sustained a longer run for this underrated bunch of fly-by-nights. The album opens with It Wasn't For You, a quite pleasant jazz-tinged prog affair, not unlike Chris Farlow-fronted Colosseum or Fuzzy Duck. The second song, Hall of Bright Carvings, is the strongest on offer here. When it opens, you have a nice instrumental bit with a lot of guitar along with a crumb horn-style flourish reminiscent of Griffin, Red Queen to Griffin Freeze, on the top 15 albums ever, probably. Some slower interludes and Jethro Tull-like bits of flute arrive before the vocals break in around the 4-minute mark. It then descends into a more experimental jazz style, eventually circling back to the harmonized vocals around 8 minutes. The tune changes several times during the course of this epic, and different instruments come to the focus, making it a tour de force and, from a progressive rock standpoint, the high watermark of the album. Non-symphonic 70s prog summed up in a single song, really. The tempo slows down somewhat with I Can't Change, a much more conventional song, which again features good flute work, but after the epic which preceded it, seems slightly flat, apart from a midway crescendo building bridge which recalls the early work of Hawkwind. It's All Up With Us is another change of pace, an almost mainstream-sounding rock ballad, which is nevertheless quite charming in its own way, but the saxophone solo is a little ill-advised. However, in typical TG fashion, things change again quickly with the final song, Fuschia, an altogether heavier affair with a doomier atmosphere which, although not quite as heavy, sounds like the sort of thing that helped to lay the groundwork for the soon-to-arrive work of the likes of Jerusalem and Uriah Heep. As a straight one-off song, rather than a grand progressive suite, this is probably the album's most enjoyable. Although not part of the original release, the CD version of which this is a review includes 3 bonus tracks, all taken from an EP the band released around the same time as the album. Open the Door Homer is arguably the band's best-known work, having appeared on Dawn compilations over the years, although a boogie-tinged song not a million miles away from Doug of Two-Head era status quo, it is not the most representative track in their repertoire, if indeed one could pick a song that sums them up. Woman of the World, a mournful ballad of lost love, follows and provides another interesting facet to this diverse band, before the collection ends with Liverpool, an organ-driven shuffler that deliberately echoes a Mersey beat sound, albeit with a decidedly progressive rock slant stirred in. As is sometimes the case on these prog re-releases, see for instance the aforementioned Fuzzy Duck, the bonus tracks bear little resemblance as to what is on the actual album, but in this case they are worthwhile additions, as they're all good rock songs in their right. In all, this is a fine release by a band who took the experimental ethos of progressive rock to heart and had a stab at a lot of things. In the end, not everything comes off, but when this album is good, it is blooming excellent, and at no point does the quality dip too low, in all an unjustly forgotten gem that you would do well to cock an ear towards. I think this is an excellent little release if you anticipate something, as I stated, with a British folk horror mood. I think if you're invested in that, driving around a certain countryside, or, in a certain imaginative state, it can be very useful and enjoyable. Let me know if you enjoyed the album, if you've decided to give it a whirl. I'm very interested to hear others' perspectives on this one. Don't expect anything too heavy, but something that would be considered rollicking and raucous by the context of 1970. This might be just prior to the release of Black Sabbath's first two albums. I'm not quite certain. Anyway, I hope everyone is well. Have the best possible day and night you have ever imagined. Thanks again, friends.